Coming up on Arirang News, employment is recovering among South Korean young people, and a record high number of them are preparing for the job hunt, studying for exams, especially in the public sector. South Korean lawmakers are moving forward on a bill to stop Google from forcing apps to use only the Google billing system to charge app users for content. And South Korea's new coronavirus cases are averaging more than 1,000 a day. In the coming hours, all members of the Navy's Cheonghae Unit serving near Africa will be brought back home for treatment, most of them having caught the virus. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Employment has been recovering among young South Koreans. Now the number of young people preparing for exams to get a job has risen to an all-time high. And in the pandemic, it looks like they're focused on job security by going for public sector jobs. Seo Eun-kyung reports.
More young Koreans landed on a job in May. According to Statistics Korea, the employment rate among people aged 15 to 29 rose by 2.2 percentage points in May from a year earlier to 44.4%. Also, the unemployment rate among that age group went down by 0.9 of a percentage point to 9.3%, showing things are better in the first few months of the pandemic.
Among people with at least some university education, 86.2% said they were looking for work, which is an increase of 1.2 percentage points from a year earlier. For wage workers, it took an average of 10.1 months for them to find their first job, which is an increase of 0.1 months.
On the other hand, among the economically inactive population, there has been a huge rise in those who've decided it is time to get a job. Economically inactive people are those who have the ability to work but are not doing so due to a lack of what they see as suitable options. The proportion of economically inactive people who are preparing for employment reached almost 19% in May, the highest level since 2006 when the data was first compiled. That was an increase of 2.1 percentage points from a year earlier. And among them, the proportion looking to work for government agencies as civil servants accounted for the largest share at 32.2%, an on-year increase of 4.1 percentage points. The ratio of people looking to work for private corporations was down by 2.5 percentage points, and for media and public corporations, it was down by 2 percentage points. Seo Eun-kyung, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in is calling for measures to help people rebuild their credit if they've taken a hit in the pandemic but have been making a good faith effort to make their payments. The Blue House says Moon told his officials to come up with measures to do that in a meeting today with his aides. As for relief payments for small business, the administration wants to help those who've been hit by the stricter distancing rules. Separately, during a cabinet meeting this morning, Moon stressed that the government's extra budget bill will be used to provide reliable financial support for the vulnerable. Korean content providers like Naver and Kakao have been paying big commissions to Google for processing payments for in-app content. But now local lawmakers are moving to put a stop to this and give users a choice of payment systems. Jang Tae-hyun reports.
Lawmakers in South Korea are trying to prevent global tech giant Google's in-app billing system from holding a monopoly over in-app purchases. They want to allow app developers to be able to offer their customers a range of payment methods. The National Assembly's Science and ICT Committee on Tuesday held a meeting, and 2/3 of the members agreed to bring this legislation to a plenary session. Google's in-app purchase system is used on apps downloaded through its Play Store.
Previously, people could only purchase games through the Google app, but the in-app purchase policy will force people to pay for contents like music only through Google's billing system.
The lawmakers are pushing for this legislation because from April next year, Google will start charging 30% commission on any purchases made through its billing system, from webtoons and ebooks to music. It currently only takes that commission from in-app purchases from games. Google has over 70% of Korea's app market share. It originally tried to apply the new payment rules starting from the end of September, but has decided to make an optional extension until April. Korea isn't the only country taking on Google. In the US, an antitrust lawsuit was lodged against Google by 36 states and Washington, D.C., alleging the tech giant was abusing its power over app developers. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports in the first half of 2021 surpassed $300 billion for the first time. But exports are facing another problem, the disruption to global shipping, and as a result, not enough space at Korea's ports. Bae-eun-ji has more.
Busan Port, South Korea's largest and the world's 7th busiest container port, is heavily congested. With so many containers unable to find a slot on a container vessel, they are now stacked up to their vertical limit of 6. This is because there's a shortage of cargo ships, and as shipping prices soar due to the disruption to the industry caused by the pandemic.
The global economy was on a downward trend even before the pandemic, so a lot of shipping companies ordered less container ships. Then the pandemic hit, so consumption shrank, but then it rebounded, and demand started to soar. And it was impossible to keep up with the spike in demand.
Right now, containers are taking up 90% of the port store's capacity, so it's running out of space to store additional shipments.
In order to operate smoothly, containers usually take up about 70% of this port's capacity. If it tops 80%, there isn't enough space to rearrange the containers.
Unfortunately, it's impossible to supply more container ships at the current time.
We ordered 12 new container ships with 13,000 TEU capacity, but they'll only be available in 2023 or 2024. It takes time to manufacture ships because they need lead time, or the time it takes to create the products.
The shortage of space has forced local businesses to cut production or hike prices. In June, South Korea's leading tire maker Hankuk Tire had to suspend operations at its key local factories for 3 days. The situation will likely to be prolonged as well as more shipping demand is expected during the upcoming Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on. Thanks for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, stocks on Wall Street overnight saw their biggest drop since May, or in the case of the Dow, the biggest point-wise drop since last October. Corporate earnings have been good, but it seems this is because of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. What is the story in the global markets?
Yes, U.S. all three index fell quite sharply, particularly for Dow Jones. It fell by 700 points plus, which is the worst session since October of last year, as the investor continued to grow worry over the spread of the COVID Delta variant. If you look at the S&P, it fell by 1.6%. Also, NASDAQ did fairly reasonably better, but still it fell by more than 1%. Now, the NASDAQ also continued to show a fifth losing streak, since this is the longest streak of losses since the October. As I said, a continuous concern about the COVID-19 cases, the Delta variant, might cause the economic recovery to be slowed or even fall into the more of a recessionary territories again, because most of the countries are trying to close down and contain this COVID-19 new cases as this seems to be spreading much faster than it had been in the past. Of course, the case is that the death rate of this is much lower, and therefore I think the uncertainty is not going to last for a very long period of time. But nevertheless, closing down the opening is actually putting negative sentiment to the global economy. And also, the market is continues to be still concerned about the rising prices. We are seeing the the consumer price index rising very sharply for U.S., but not just for the U.S. It's happening for Germany. The numbers just came out, and that PPI number is actually highest since last 39 years. So clearly, there's a bottleneck of the supply chain, and that's continued to affect negatively in terms of the inflationary pressure. And if that continues, then people are concerned that the Fed or the global central banks would raise interest rate in a short period of time. If that's the case, then people are concerned that this is probably start of the correction for the global equity market. However, though, we don't think that the central banks will be putting measures to raise interest rate or taking away the liquidity conditions. We think that the current interest rate low environment is making people to be a bit more concerned about the domestic consumption recovery not happening for most of the countries. And if that's the case, then these inflationary pressure is not going to be long-term basis. So therefore, they're not going to touch the interest rate anytime soon. So all in all, people are very concerned and confused at the current point in time. And that's because maybe the market has risen so much in the past several months.
Well, it has indeed, and it's been a while since we've seen this kind of volatility. And you were just addressing this to an extent, but do you think this kind of volatility is something that's going to continue, or what do you see going forward?
I think that the number one, you need some time for the breathing, because if you look at the U.S. market from the beginning of the year, most of the indexes are up by 12 to 15%. So that's actually half a year rising that much. If you look at from the 2009 to 2020, average S&P rise was about 16% per annum, and average NASDAQ rise was about 20% per annum. So if in the 6 month markets were risen by almost close to the whole year average, then obviously you need some time for taking breather. And that's probably what's happening for the time being. And on top of that, these inflation number came in for the June, which we were hoping that numbers to be fairly reasonably slowing down from the previous month, but it didn't. And it actually went up to 5.4% year-on-year growth rate. So I think that market is waiting for another inflation number for the July number, which will be released in early August. We need probably some of these assurance measures before the market to further rise. But we don't think that economy is slowing down to the case where the recession happens again, because given the factor that the ample liquidity that's available in the system, and also we are seeing these inflation numbers coming through, we think the nominal growth rate will be definitely high, and economy recovery would be a good support for the equity market to further rise. So all in all, I think that we just need some time period to recognize the inflation is not going to be a major concern, or the economic recession is not going to be the case that are coming through in the future.
Well, Korean stocks are down today, too, for a third session in a row. The Kospi getting closer to that 3,200 level, and the Kosdaq at around 1040. Tell us about the domestic market.
Yes, as you said, Kospi is down by about 0.35%. Kosdaq is down by about 0.59%. However, though, it is a little bit better than what it was at 2 p.m. today. It was probably the lowest area where both indexes were down by 1% plus. But it did recover towards the end, fairly reasonably nicely recovered. But in any case, right now, because U.S. market is uncertain and that the Korean won is depreciating, and it did go up to as high as 1150 plus, and if the continuation of the depreciation of the won happens, then foreign investors are going to be not the buyer of the market, and they were net seller. And today also they sold about 240 billion won of Kospi. And the currency movement is very important. For the time being, if you look at the South Korea's new daily cases for the COVID-19 Delta variant plus, it did show continuously over 1,000 cases per day. It seems to be happening for the past 2 weeks in a row. And if that's the case, then people are concerned about domestic consumption is not going to be strong in the future in the second half. Then maybe the Korean won might depreciate further, and then foreign investors not going to be coming back to the buy market. And this could cause a vicious cycle, and that's what people are concerned about. However, I don't think that that's going to be the case on a longer-term basis because the corporate earnings are good and the export numbers are very strong. And domestic consumption of the U.S. as well as China is not going to weaken to the level that's going to cause the export to filter. We think that the Korea's export numbers will continue to remain to be very strong even the second half of this year. If that's the case, then I don't think that the won can depreciate further from the 1150 territories. If the won stabilizes and if the earnings growth numbers are coming through for the second quarter, we think that Kospi can recover. But for the time being, still uncertainty is there.
And finally, looking at oil prices for a minute. West Texas Intermediate's down by more than 7%. OPEC Plus agreeing to an increase in production, also the surge in virus cases. What's happening with oil right now?
Yes, I've been saying that the oil price going up above $70 and $77, that's overpriced. I've been saying that it's not going to go through the $100 plus territories as some of the U.S. investment banks are saying. We think that the range bound should happen, as I said many times, anywhere between $65 to $75 in the range. Now, obviously, the reason why the oil price fell sharply was because the OPEC Plus has agreed to raise the output, and that amounts to be around 400,000 barrels per day on a monthly, starting August of 2021. Clearly, the output increase was there. The price control that we've seen tightly by the global cases because if you look at the U.S. shale gas companies, they weren't really producing as aggressively. But now OPEC Plus decides to increase the production, then obviously shale gas would do the same. So all in all, that's negatively in terms of the supply side. In terms of demand, yes, demands are picking up, and it's definitely positive news. But we don't think that it's the case where we've seen in 2008, where all these oil prices were rising to the $140 plus level. We don't think that that's the case. Right now, the leak counts and the supply numbers are limited to control the price. But once the supply numbers picks up, then I don't think that the oil price can remain to be high. And we already saw price going down from the peak to the bottom by about 8% plus. However, though, at around $66, $67 per barrel, it's towards the end of the range or the bottom of the range. So we are expecting $65 to $75 range. So I don't think that the oil price is going to further fall because the demand is definitely there as the economy is recovering on global scale. And if the energy consumption is definitely picking up for the summer, and that means that the supply chain-wise, oil remains to be the very strong demand for the energy. So all in all, we think that the oil price should be on a range-bound anywhere between $65 to $75.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
South Korea has now averaged 1,000 coronavirus cases a day for the past week. Today's number is lower than the recent peak of more than 1,600, but it's still in the 1,200s. The Delta variant is accounting for an increasing proportion of those. Of all the variant cases, it's at around 40%. Jaein reports.
South Korea on Tuesday reported 1,278 new cases of coronavirus, hovering above the 1,000 mark for almost 2 weeks straight. This is the highest number yet for a Tuesday and comes despite fewer tests carried out over the weekend. All but 36 of the new cases were locally transmitted. Over the past week, the capital region reported around 1,000 cases a day on average. While social distancing level 4 in the metropolitan area is due to end on the 25th, health authorities say there are no signs yet of the number of infections decreasing.
The effect of the social distancing measures will be apparent in a week to 10 days. We will continue to closely monitor this week's situation and discuss with the government, local governments, and experts on adjusting antivirus restrictions.
Meanwhile, concerns continue to grow over variant strains. According to an analysis done over the past 7 days, mutant strains were identified in more than 52% of the infected cases. The most dominant strain was the Delta variant at nearly 40%. Regions outside the capital area are also reporting more cluster infections, accounting for more than 30% of all new cases for a third day in a row. Health authorities say the number is expected to increase with the spread of the Delta variant and with more people traveling over the summer vacation period. Meanwhile, health authorities have announced that in-person worship will be allowed at churches even under social distancing level 4. But churches will have to keep the capacity limit to 10% with a maximum of 19 people. Up until now, face-to-face religious activities were completely banned under level 4. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
And all 301 members of the South Korean Navy's Cheonghae Unit, who'd been on a mission in waters off Africa, will arrive back in Korea this evening, transported home by plane after most of them caught COVID-19 on board their ship. Once they land at Seoul Air Base at 6 p.m. Korea time, they'll be sent to treatment centers, and the 16 members who've been treated at overseas hospitals will be taken to military hospitals. So far, over 82% of the crew have tested positive for the virus. The Defense Ministry says it will test all the crew again when they arrive. South Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-gun said today that recent controversial remarks by a Seoul-based Japanese diplomat greatly hampered plans for a now scrapped South Korea-Japan summit. Choi was speaking this morning on his way to Tokyo. Also on relations with Japan, he said Japan should get rid of the export restrictions on South Korea that it imposed 2 years ago. But he also said the two sides need to work together against COVID-19 and for peace on the Korean peninsula. Choi will sit down with his Japanese counterpart in the coming hours. On Wednesday, he'll attend talks with his counterparts from the U.S. and Japan. The late chairman of Samsung Group, Lee Kun-hee, donated an unprecedented number of works of art to 2 of Korea's national museums. And now these pieces are finally on display to the public at the National Museum of Korea and the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. Ahead of Wednesday's opening, our culture correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has a sneak peek.
Finally, the masterpieces are unveiled. 2 national museums have been given a total of more than 21,000 works from the late Samsung Group chairman Lee Kun-hee's massive art collection, and they will start displaying those works to the public on Wednesday.
Under the title A Great Cultural Legacy, Masterpieces from the Bequest of the late Samsung chairman Lee Kun-hee, the National Museum of Korea is holding a 2-month exhibition presenting Lee's valuable art and antiques to the public.
Art and antiques spanning from the prehistoric era to the early 20th century show a glimpse into the remarkable diversity of the collection.
Lee's collection is extensive, covering all periods and genres. Earthenware from prehistoric times, gilt bronze statues from the Three Kingdoms period, Goryeo Dynasty transcriptions of Buddhist scriptures, and Joseon-era paintings.
2 Goryeo-era Buddhist paintings are so old that infrared and X-ray photography has been used so that visitors can see the details. Other highlights include the ink and wash painting Clearing After Rain on Mount Inwang by Joseon-era court painter Jung Sun, and The Sound of Autumn drawn by another celebrated court painter Kim Hong-do. Under the title Lee Kun-hee Collection Masterpieces of Korean Art, The MMCA's Hall 2 kicks off its exhibition on July 21st, 58 pieces by 34 artists. The unique works by artists who served as the backbone of Korean modern art, such as Kim Hwang-gi's Woman and Jars and Lee Jung-seop's Bull, will catch visitors' eyes.
The donated art renews the donation culture and is a chance to rewrite the history of Korean modern and contemporary art. The MMCA will further study and research to share the result with art lovers.
The National Museum of Korea will run its exhibition until September 26th, while the MMCA's exhibition will go until March 13th next year. Both need to be booked in advance through the official website, and tickets are selling fast. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.